Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Faculty Forum. My name is Laura DiNardis. I'm a professor and an associate dean here in the School of Communication at American University. And I feel very privileged to introduce you today to one of my colleagues, Professor Erica Menchen-Trevino, who joined American University as a professor in the Public Communication Division in our school. She has a very interesting research area that is at the intersection of digital media studies and political communication with an emphasis on methodology. And today, she is going to discuss her very interesting project called Web Historian that looks at trace digital data, the types of things that are used by governments and corporations to track people. So it's a very, very interesting subject. Without further ado, please help me welcome our wonderful colleague, Professor Erica Menchen-Trevino.
Thanks very much, Laura, and thanks to everybody for being here on a lovely spring day. So I want to start off with talking about the motivation behind the project. So there was a study a friend of mine did. This was an experiment that showed that when you bring students into a lab and ask them to sign up for a new social networking site, about 98% of them skip the part of the terms of service that says that they'll give away their firstborn child. I think this highlights a bigger structural problem. It's easy to sort of blame individuals like, oh, they should have read this. But another study looked at the concept of, the study happened actually before privacy self-management was a term, but it sort of illustrates that if we read every privacy policy of every website that we visited, we'd spend anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes every day doing that. And that was back in 2008. So it's probably a lot worse now, potentially. So the privacy self-management system is a problem. And so it's also a problem for social sciences, right? So to keep social sciences up to date with the current world that we live in, we need to use digital traces and to understand our digital world. I think this is really an imperative thing. But if we're entering this world where people are used to feeling fooled by privacy policies that are meant to sort of nudge them to give away all of their data, if we adopt similar practices as social scientists, that's a really big problem. So I think there's a lot of great work going on in this area that is done in a great ethical way, but I want to sort of promote a new term to nudge us a little bit closer towards a world that I would like to contribute to, and also that we risk losing some research participants to earn trust in the long run, right? So the approach is called trace partnership. So what I want to do today is first talk about the trace part, talk about what digital traces actually are. We've heard this term, but I want to go in a little bit more detail and do some activities with you guys. And then I'll talk about the approach itself, what are some of the benefits to partnering with users through informed consent to get access to digital traces. And then I'll show you the actual tool that I've developed to do that. So if you have your laptop with you, you can go to webhistorian.org and download the extension if you want to follow along with the activity at the end. Or you could just watch me do the activity, that's fine too. And then I'll talk about sort of future directions for the project. So, basically, digital traces are records of digital behavior that we're producing all the time. So everything that you do, everywhere that you go, there are sort of records of it on your phone, on your laptop, etc. So has anybody not heard of this idea before? This is something that all of us are at least familiar with at a broad level, right? What I want to help you think about is think about it more literally and to actually see some of these things. So who has an iPhone? Okay, so take out your iPhone. All right, some of you may have turned this feature off, but you can see some fun maps of exactly where you've been recently on your iPhone. If you go to the settings icon, tap on privacy, which is like a little hand, and then location services, which is sort of in the middle. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see system services, and then you'll see frequent locations. So when you tap on the location, it'll give you a map of the places that you've been. So did you see some?
Mine is off.
Yours is off, okay. Anybody else off on any other? Yours is off too?
Mine is off.
I assume yours is off. Did anybody see a map? Did anybody get to the map yet? Should I wait a minute? Click on one of the names, yeah. Then that shows you a map. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty detailed, right? So we got a few maps here. Okay, so these are mine. So this is my address on East West Highway, and this is the gas station that I go to on Connecticut. And this is work, and this is, I think this is actually the General Assembly, which I've been to a couple times. So anyway, these things are literal things. Okay, so also either on your phone or on a web browser, you can go to the EFF's website called Panopticlick, and then just choose the button Test Me. Okay, and that does a test, and I'll go over to that for different types of web tracking. So on my computer here, I have the EFF's Privacy Badger, which blocks a number of types of trackers, but my browser itself is completely unique. Based on its fingerprint. And it actually shows you the fingerprint. You have to click to sort of see this detail. But this sort of says, okay, this item is present in 1 in X number of browsers have this value, right? So this is a pretty common one. But if we scroll down to my fonts, you see that it's over, only 1 in 3,000-ish have this particular combination of fonts. But websites you visit need to know what fonts you have installed on your computer, so that information is out there, but it's actually used to individually identify your browser, right? So these are just a few ways. I have more, but I think that's enough for now. Okay. So there are several things that you can do about this kind of tracking, but it's very difficult to do everything that is possible. If you don't want to have your digital traces tracked, you should go live in the woods and whatever. So I mean, there's really there's a lot of things you can do, but there's going to be some level of tracking. So when I tell people that I research web browsing history, I'll get this reaction, which is like, do you have my browsing history? What are you doing? How do you get that? What do you know about me? But that's not what this is about. If you have any relationship to your web browsing data at all, it probably is just deleting it, right? That's the only action that we tend to take with our web browsing. But the web historian tool aims to change that, make it fun and interesting to check out your web browsing patterns. And there's a lot of things that we can learn from that. So right now I'm just going to do a quick preview so you get a sense of what the tool is, rather than I'll go through what these features actually are. But I think you can see that it's sort of fun, and you can see a number of different views that are pretty about your web browsing history. And these different search terms here, and then this is a nice, they'll float around for you and rearrange, which is kind of fun. So, and I believe this is also pretty informative. So I'll go through what that's actually doing when we get to the tool part of the talk, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to get to. So web browsing history, what is it, first of all? Where is it? And what is it actually used for? So this is what your web browsing history looks like in a database to a certain extent, right? You have the full URL, you'll have a title, a date, an ID, and how it got there, right? Was it from a link? Was it auto-generated, et cetera? You'll see several things that are here. So you can see that the title and the URL has the search terms that I used on Google included in there. So you can extract those, which is why you saw that nice little word cloud of search terms in the visualization, right? And then you can also see, even within title and the URL of particular groups and things like that. That's not something I'm taking advantage of right now, but just to give you a sense of what web browsing history literally contains. Okay, so this is a super simple diagram, and I'm sure our experts in internet architecture can put in 10 different steps here, but just to keep it really simple as far as where your web browsing records go, they're on your computer, right? Chrome by default saves your browsing history for 90 days, and other web browsers are somewhat similar. They're also on your ISP's computer, right? This has been in the news recently, so I'll get back to that as well. And then pieces of your browsing history are on every website that you visit because they want to see what people are doing on their website, what things they're clicking on, right? So it's in at least three places, and I'm sure our experts here can identify several others possibly as well. So anyway. Okay, so what's web browsing history actually for? What does it do, right? In terms of features that you personally use, you probably have used the back button, right? So this is a pretty useful feature that you go forward and backward to various web pages. And then this is a predictive, it's trying to predict what you're going to type here. So unfortunately, I've been visiting this website a little bit too often because it comes when I type in the letter R. But anyway. It also is something that you can see in your history itself, and you can click on that. And it also tells your web browser, okay, this link is a slightly different color than this one, so I know when I'm browsing that I've visited that, right? So several useful things that we use all the time that we don't think about that require your browser to know what sites you visited before, right? So from the perspective of websites that you visit, this is how they get all of their analytics, right? Everything that they track and measure about what people do online is browsing history based, right? And then we also had, if you went out and committed a murder tomorrow, I guarantee they're going to look at your browsing history the next day, right? So it's used for forensic purposes. If you look into how to analyze web browsing history, you'll get a lot of sites that are aimed at forensic uses, right? And then there's also sort of broader surveillance as well that we don't know a whole lot about, but we know that they're using various techniques to track what websites various people visit in different ways. So the thing about these uses is that it is extremely, extremely difficult, if not impossible, to have the features that we like without having the features that we don't like, right? So, okay. So now I want to move on to now that we've talked about traces, I want to talk about the trace partnership approach that I'm advocating. So this is a consent form. We've probably seen something like this if we've ever participated in a research study. It might be on paper, it might be digital, right? This sort of tells you what the study is about, and you have to go through a process called IRB. Is anybody familiar with the IRB process? Yeah, most people here anyway. So if I tell you that I'm going to collect your web browsing traces in a form like this, you have no idea what I'm asking you for, right? This is fundamentally different than asking you to fill out a survey, which is sort of what these forms were designed for, or even asking you to draw your blood in a certain sense, although that's actually somewhat more similar to the browsing history. So I think that this approach is insufficient to bringing digital traces into the social sciences with these sort of standard forms alone, right? I think it's really important, again, for social scientists to analyze these traces, but that the informed consent process needs to be educational, interesting, and valuable, right? You've probably never heard those terms mixed with informed consent before, but that's really what I am aiming to achieve with this project. And then also that the software for data collection should be completely transparent, because even in cases where we believe we're getting informed consent from research panelists in corporate panels, we don't actually know what software they're using or how it works in pretty much all cases, because these are trade secrets. So I think that it's important that we develop open source software for this purpose. Okay, so you might think, okay, who would consent to their web browsing data being part of a study, right? So there are basically 4 categories, right? There's people who would consent to it, there's people who would not consent to it, and then there's people in the middle who would consent if they were less informed, if you didn't really tell them very much about it, and there's people who would consent if they were more informed, right? I have no idea what the sizes of these various groups are, but what I'm advocating for is including the bottom group and not the top group in our studies. So, okay. So this is a public education type of approach, and I think that it's the only long-term future for behavioral social science data collection with informed consent, to really think about how people are being informed about these things. And so what I'm advocating for and using here is interactive visualizations to aid that process. And using informed consent in general and trace partnership in particular enables us to study questions that require us to look at both attitudes in our minds and our behaviors in the world. And a lot of the most difficult questions in the social sciences involve these kinds of relationships. I'm not going to get into the details of that here, but I'm happy to go more into it if anybody is interested. So basically, I think that it's really vital to develop these open source tools for several reasons, right? One is just straight up so that somebody else can do the same study and we know that they're using the same types of traces, right? We hear about data cleaning and how data is processed. It's more like data building, because when data is cleaned in a different way, it gives us completely different results. So knowing the real details makes a study replicable. It also promotes academic freedom. The other ways to get digital traces are to make partnerships with corporations, right? Which is a totally fine thing to do, but you're limited to questions that the company doesn't find threatening. And you need to preserve that partnership in a way. And so you can go outside of that, preserve academic freedom if you're partnering with users instead of with corporations. And then, the public education mission, I think, is important, and that's something that I already mentioned. And it's a way to sort of resist this privacy self-management system in a small way. I'm not saying that it's going to break down because of this, but anyway. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the web historian tool itself. I'm going to go through the video and sort of tell you what the features are, and then we'll do a little activity. And then I'll talk about the future of the project. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my video and start it from the beginning. And this is the 1 minute and 23 second version. It's pretty fast, but here it goes. Okay, so this is the network diagram, and this shows websites you browse from and to. So it's not a surprise that Google is giant in the center here, right? Here we see Facebook over here. And when you right-click on it, you have several options. You can view the underlying data, or you can delete things right here from the visualization. This is the underlying data, which is basically what I showed you in that table. It allows you to remove visits or entire domains. This is the only extension, I think, that allows you to do domains. This is the website, the total visit numbers, right? You can look at when you visited a particular website. So I visit Google Docs all times of the day and night. I do my slides there and all kinds of other things, right? You can also look at overall history that way. These are the search terms I used this week. And then if you sort of push it out a couple weeks more, you see a few more types of terms, and this shows the actual underlying terms. And this view allows two different views. You see very different sizes of Google and Facebook here. Now we're going to the habits view, which is looking at, this bubbles are sized by a number of different days that that you visit the websites. And this is doing the full 90-day history. And you see these are much more similar if you look at it in terms of days rather than total number of visits with the highlighting there. So that's the big picture of several of the things it can do. I left some things out, but basically this view, I think, gives you a pretty good idea of the websites that I visit on most days. And you could see this for yourself as well if you use Chrome, Internet Explorer, or Firefox. We're working on Safari. Safari doesn't let you go back in time. You can only go forward in time, so it's a little bit different. But anyway, that's the tool as it currently stands. So what I want you to do is take out a pen and paper if you can, or just think about these questions if you can't. But you can do this whether you have a computer with you or not. But these are some questions that you could think about, right? What website do you go to almost every time you use this computer? Do you use some of these sites at particular times of the day? What time of day and day of the week do you usually browse the web on this computer? Right? Which websites do you rely on to access other information from around the web? And what did you use a search engine on this computer to find out this week? And how does that compare to what you were looking for last week? And then what articles have you read on this computer that have Trump in the title, right? So you guys, this is kind of hard, right? But most people can come up with some kind of answers to these questions. A little bit. A little bit. Okay, give you another minute. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and show you how to answer them on Web Historian. So I'm going to open the actual application. Okay, so the first question was, the websites you go to almost every time you use this computer. So that was the view that I just showed you. I'm going to go to the habits view and change it from this week to my full 90-day history. It's going to take a second. It's going to swing around, and it will show you a pretty similar picture to what was on the video. We'll see Google Drive, Google Calendar, Facebook, Twitter, my email, right, and American, and Amazon pretty often. Okay, so you get a good sense of that. And then you can see if you look at these things at particular times of day, so maybe Facebook, we could see when do I view Facebook. So sort of scattered. You see my commuting time here. Okay. And then what time of day and day of the week do you usually browse the web on this computer, right? You can see that here if I go to look at all of the weeks. I browse quite a lot. It's going to take it a second to update. Sorry, that's taking a second, but it shows a full screen there because I browse all the time. And then, which websites do you rely on to access other information from around the web? That's the network view. So that's this one. So if this gets a whole lot bigger than a week for me, it turns into a hairball, which is a technical term in network science. But anyway, so you'll see Google remains in the center here. The email remains fairly central. So you can see some of the top central things, right? Google Docs. But these are the sites that really lead me to other websites that are out there. And let's see. What did I use a search engine on this computer to find out about this week? So we can see that too. So we'll go to the search terms. Oh, I'm already on last week. So last week it was Tableau. It's always a technology for me. So I'm pretty boring in that way. But it does change week by week. So last week was Tableau. And something with Google Cloud, it looks like. And then if I go to this week, you'll see more. It's a lot more about like machine learning kind of things. So anyway, and then Trump in the title. So we can see that stuff right here. If you go to the data table, and in the search, I'm going to type in Trump. And you can see I did a presentation with that was about visualizing Trump's tweet activity. So you'll see that there, and then just various articles for class and not for class. But you can sort of see the details of all of those things. So, okay, great. So I don't see a lot of laptops in here, but was anybody able to follow along? No. Well, you'll have to trust me when I say that you will find surprising answers in a lot of cases. I probably analyze my web browsing history more than any human being. And yesterday I went and I'm like, oh, I probably accessed this website at this time of day, and I was totally wrong, right? So it's a very habitual kind of process, even if you know you're being observed and are going to give a presentation with your own web browsing data in a few days, right? So I think it just highlights how habitual these kinds of things are. So I would argue that this is already a vast improvement over an informed consent form, but it could be improved in a lot of ways, and I'm very much open to suggestions about different types of visualizations and things like that. It's also, the tool itself is useful for other purposes. If you are doing research interviews about people's online behavior, it would be helpful, given what we just demonstrated about how much people remember their actual web browsing, to be looking at web browsing data together with your interview subject. And so that's called the trace interview approach, which that's another sort of goal of the visualization as well, is to sort of help in an interview process. It's also useful for individual time management and just sort of knowing when you use various websites and things like that. And then if you participate in the research project, you can submit your data from different browsers and compare yourself to the average user, meaning the average user who submitted to this project, who is probably not very average, but you can get some sense of how your browsing compares to other people. So we're going to be sort of filling out that section of the website. So in terms of the future of the project, currently it's one extension that has a lot of features. What we're going to do shortly is break it up into separate extensions that have a single purpose. So we'll have a time management extension, the network extension will be separate, et cetera. And that will, I think, make it much more straightforward to people to understand the purpose of the extension, and it'll simplify the interface. And it'll also separate out the research participation process from the exploration process more cleanly. And then we're also going to expand from Chrome only right now to also Firefox, Edge, which is the new version of Internet Explorer, and Safari as well. So in the near term, also, I'll be doing some research to see what information people are able to learn from these visualizations, as well as expand to mobile browsing, which is a big technical challenge. In the longer term future, I'd like to look at other types of web browsing data. There's a lot that we can do in terms of more of the content of web pages and looking at specific sites and things like that. And I'd also look to research other types of digital traces and expanding the trace partnership approach beyond the web browsing field. So basically, yes. In terms of research projects, I'll be trying to operationalize the informed part of informed consent for digital traces and to test the visualization methods, and then also try to understand better the role of political partisanship and political interest in how we select and avoid online news. So that's another project. And then I also want to ramp up the public education campaign side of this, as you may have heard, and as it might be being signed by the president right now. There were supposed to be increased privacy protections and regulations that are now no longer going to exist. So meaning that your ISP can sell your web browsing history, and unfortunately my tool cannot solve that problem for you, right? That it is a tool that looks at the history that's on your computer, but as the diagram I showed previously, it's also on other computers as well, and it doesn't solve that problem. However, if you're interested, there was a recent article on Medium about how to set up your own VPN, which does actually solve that problem. So that's what I have for today. Thanks very much. Yes.
That was amazing. Oh, okay. Thank you. What an excellent project and an excellent presentation. I think that your efforts to update our very old informed consent practices for the digital age are invaluable and have the potential to really transform scholarship. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have about a zillion questions, but I'm going to narrow it down to two that I would be interested to hear you talk through.
Sure.
That I think pose immediate challenges in terms of the adoption of this tool and practice within the academy. One is the question of generalizability.
Yeah.
I mean, as a longtime social scientist, I know that that's always an iffy proposition. But if, as you say, you're aiming for that segment of the Venn diagram that is actively informed, I'm concerned about how you account for all of understanding uninformed populations.
Yes, excellent question. So I'll go ahead and address that. I want to get back to my Venn diagram here. Okay, so there's already this group here who no circumstances would consent, right? These people are not in play at all for a project that involves informed consent. I don't know how big this group is relative to this group up here, but the generalizability problem exists for all projects that use informed consent. And it's especially difficult for projects that use any kind of web browsing traces. This group is pretty big, and they're not this group or this group. So you have the generalizability problem already. It's baked in. I don't see why we shouldn't go for the more informed group rather than the less informed group among those who are persuadable. So that's really the thing that I'd like to make. With web browsing history in particular, especially now that we can purchase this information, you can actually compare the information that you get with informed consent to anonymized data that has the whole population, and you can see then if the types of behaviors that you're interested in studying are different among the group that does consent versus the group that doesn't consent. So that takes a little bit of money and extra data, but it is an issue that can be directly addressed with this kind of collection.
Cool. And not to be a mycog, but the second half of the question is about international respondents. So the U.S., as you note, is getting more draconian and less willing to privilege the privacy of everyday citizens and consumers. But if you look at laws passed in other countries like the UK Snoopers Charter, it's even worse, where ISPs are actually compelled to collect and share this kind of information. So how, as a collector of end user data, how do you conceive of your capacity to deliver on the promises of your informed consent when you're dealing with subjects who are outside of the bounds of U.S. law?
Yes, excellent question. I think that basically nobody can promise that this data is not already on servers up in Maryland at the NSA headquarters, right? And I don't think that these kind of projects exacerbate the problem. We live in the world that we live in that has all of these kinds of problems, and if we take the appropriate security precautions, I think that that we're not making that any worse than it already is. But that's the issue here with, these people are not safe. So, the problem with showing people their traces is that they don't want to know how much information this is and how much is out there. It's sort of like knowing that you have Alzheimer's disease or something. Like, there's not much you can do about it. So yeah, the world is terrible.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mariana. I'm a doctoral student here. Following up with what you just said, I actually wanted to ask what you are learning about how users feel about this data. So because they signed the consent, and I remember that before you mentioned that some users may actually tinker with the settings of your app where like they can turn it off if they want to browse more privately from your project and turn it back on. So I guess my question is two things. How much, when your participants, how much do they appropriate the tool, like messing with the settings? And also, what are you learning about what they feel about this data that's being tracked?
Yes, so I don't have information about that for this project, but I do have that information for my previous project, which was my dissertation project that used a different type of technology, which was a proxy server. So basically in that project, it's a self-selected group, and so their feelings might very well be different from the feelings of other people, but I felt, they had participated in a quite an, I wouldn't say arduous because I tried to make it as easily as possible, study, but people have mixed feelings about this kind of data, for sure. Some people appreciate seeing it, and those are the people that I get. And some people do not, and I do not get those people. But in terms of how much do people withhold their data from these projects, that's another, maybe that's another sort of group here. They would consent if they could withhold certain kinds of data, right? And I do accommodate that in this tool and in the previous tool. In the previous tool, it was I got about 90% of the cases. With this tool, I don't have that percentage yet, but it will be tracked. So if you delete something in Web Historian, it says that X number of things have been deleted. It doesn't have any information about what they are, but it says, okay, this person removed 90% of their data. Maybe I don't want to, maybe this is not valuable, kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
I have two questions as well. The first was when you were showing the icon of the policeman, and you were talking about all of the data that they would get on you. That's still, I mean, they can't get it as soon as you commit a crime, right? They would need to go through a process to get that.
Yes, I believe so. I'm not super familiar with the details of that, but yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
there would need to be a warrant, and they'd seize your computer and that sort of thing. Or if you're coming in at the airport, they can just take it all. But anyway, from internationally, that has been completely seized if you bring any kind of computer across the international border. But yeah, that or a warrant if you're a U.S. citizen.
Interesting. Okay, and so would you explain again how we would be able to either get involved with the project or see that data visualization, the colorful mapping of our use? If we have
Yes.
Chrome, for instance, I didn't get the URL there as far
Yes,
as how we do.
webhistorian.org.
Okay.
So if you go to webhistorian.org, you can see all of your data in Chrome, and soon to be many other browsers as well. Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. This is one of the first times I haven't multitasked during a presentation. I was absolutely riveted. But I have a question about how this applies in app-mediated environments. If you think about the trends around the world towards, most people don't even have a laptop. They're accessing the internet from smartphones using wireless technology. And I was just wondering about, from either a technological standpoint or just a functional standpoint, how this applies in or can test the app-mediated environments as portals.
Yes, that is the big technological question that's facing the project. So you really hit the nail on the head with that question. There are a few things I'm looking into in terms of using proxy servers on your phone. That is the one possible approach that will sometimes work, but it's a data war in a way, and individuals are losing in terms of if you as an individual, another thing I like about the partnership approach is that if you as an individual have access to your data, you can, under the right circumstances, consent to be part of a research project. But to the extent that individuals are locked out of their own data, and it's captured entirely within an app and not within the browser. If you think about a mobile browser, your browsing is much less often in your mobile browser than when you're on your desktop. If you go to Facebook, you go to the Facebook website through your browser, versus a contained app is a very different kind of system. And so I'm thinking about ways to deal with that issue, but it is a really important issue. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. This is wonderful. I mean, I knew about the project before, but it's so great to see it on the big screen as well. Have you thought of the benefits for the individual and maybe doing a study about, what could be the effects of people having access to this type of technology, changing their habits? I mean, I think that would affect me in a way, being able to see all of this.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really the individual benefit side of the equation. The information and the informed consent in this case is actually designed to benefit the person individually. And so that's really the thing that I can offer as an incentive for participating is, you get access to this information that you could use to help manage your time better, to think about the websites that you browse, think about if you're captured by certain websites, or a lot of other questions. So yeah, that's definitely something that I am actively interested in learning more about and enhancing with the tool, because that is the way to get people to do the project. Yeah.
Erica, with your Venn diagram up there, so up at the top and up at the bottom, you've got the folks who are less informed or folks who are more informed. So how are you defining informed?
Well, these are the people who would consent if you said web browsing data and didn't explain further, right? And these are the people who would consent if you gave them a lot more information about it, such as the visualizations and things like that.
Okay.
Right.
And what do you think might be the tipping point between those two? Is there a tipping point, which
I
way
wish
they
I
might
knew.
go? But that's what you're going to be looking at.
Yeah,
guess.
I really have no idea whether the top group is 90% of those in the middle, or if the bottom group is, I doubt 90%, but that's definitely something to be looked into.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and I've been following it, and it is great to see it up on the big screen. You know, I keep thinking of this from a strategic communication, and I don't know that I have a question. I'm not really formulating it yet, but I'm thinking about like the same way we have demographic profiles. If we had tracing profiles, and instead of using it in marketing, how it might be used in research. And I don't know there's a question. I'm just thinking about how we would be able to start studying populations not based on demographic group, but based on their digital behavior.
Yeah. I mean, I think marketers are already absolutely in that world, but academics are not, right? So I think it's an important field of study, and that's absolutely, something that I'll be involved in. And it's a big change in terms of how we conceptualize different groups of people. But I think that it could be, marketers are interested in it for predicting very specific things like purchasing, right? But we could think about what are we as academics interested in predicting, maybe voting, maybe who knows. There could be all kinds of different attitudes, different kinds of outcomes. So that's definitely a rich area. Yes, absolutely, yeah. Although I doubt too many of those would give you their browsing history, but practical points anyway. Yeah.
Another quick question. This is more of a personal question about how you browse the web.
Sure.
So you know that you're scrutinizing yourself, and I was just wondering how that affects your individual behavior. Do you find yourself self-censoring in some cases and not going to certain sites that could be embarrassing if they are put up on the screen here? I mean, how does it affect you personally?
Yeah, I would say there's been a few cases like that, and when I've looked through, I have deleted a few particular websites or something like that. It's something I've gotten used to over time since I've had at least a somewhat working version of this for a while, close a year and a half at least. So over time, I've learned to just you can switch on incognito mode. That your browsing doesn't come through that way. But I find that I do that very rarely, maybe once every couple weeks or something. And I have to search like a medical term or something like that. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Who would like to ask the closing question? And if not, I'll take the privilege of asking one more. And it has to do with long-term prospects for privacy. When you think about the business models that are monetizing all of this, we are using things for free. The Faustian bargain is that a lot of data is collected. And then, of course, the global tensions around trying to stop things like terrorism and enforce intellectual property rights versus having basic free speech and basic privacy. What is your view of the long-term prospects for privacy? The movie The Circle is about to come out. Mm. You have a circle on the screen. So what are the long-term prospects?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I tend to be slightly more optimistic about the extremely long-term prospects rather than the next 4 years or so. But, there are huge forces that are, bringing us towards a surveillance capitalism kind of model where this is sort of one of the main currencies of the realm that, people's private data is sold because, and currently the brakes are not being put on as they maybe would have been if certain regulations were in place. But yeah, I tend to be, the solutions that I see are extremely imperfect as well, because if we did pay to use these services, then people who have less money would be the ones who were surveilled. And so I see that as extremely problematic as well. So yeah, I'm not strongly in the optimistic or pessimistic camp.
Okay, on that note, our time is coming to a close, so I would like to thank Professor Erica Menchen-Trevino for a wonderful presentation. Just a few more thank yous, if you will. I would like to thank Dean Rutenbeck for his support of all of our activities, including the Faculty Forum. And it's wonderful to be in a School of Communication because we have fantastic production people that make all of this possible. So I would like to especially thank our director of all of these things, Jeffrey Madison. He's behind the glass there, to thank him for that. And just want to give some attribution to his team. It's amazing what it takes to make something like this happen. So thank you to Matt Fries, Emma Dackwell, Ingrid Grant, and Nick Gatson on the cameras, to on audio, Imani Mulyayer and Aubrey Gilbran, and production manager, Tom Fish, photographer, Sean Schroth. I think I got almost everyone except for other technical directors, Yuzhang Chen and Sarah Goodwin. So please join me again in thanking Erica